You tried to ruin my business and me, but you destroyed yourself instead. Who's the loser now, Melina?
Graham Voss knew his wife was cheating the moment he heard her laugh through his car speakers, a laugh he hadn't heard in their bedroom for 6 months, directed at another man's voice saying, "Meet me at the usual place, beautiful." The audio clip lasted 12 seconds. 12 seconds that shattered 22 years of marriage, 17 years of building his logistics software company, and every assumption he'd made about the woman sleeping next to him each night. Graham sat in his home office, staring at the waveform on his computer screen. The voice recognition software he'd installed in their shared Lexus had captured everything. Melina's phone calls, her conversations with passengers, even her singing along to the radio. He'd installed it 3 weeks ago after noticing she'd started password-protecting devices that had been open books for years. The timestamp showed Tuesday, 3:47 p.m., yesterday. While he'd been debugging server issues and preparing for a client presentation, his wife had been planning her next rendezvous. "Dad, dinner's ready." Tyler appeared in the doorway, his 17-year-old frame filling the space. Chess trophies lined the shelves behind him, evidence of a methodical mind Graham had fostered since the boy was 8. "Be right there," Graham replied, closing the laptop with careful precision. The dining room felt different now. Melina sat across from him, cutting her salmon with mechanical movements. Her escrow officer job required attention to detail, but lately she'd been distracted even during routine family conversations. "How was your day?" Graham asked, the question loaded with new meaning. "Busy. Had 3 closings and a problem with the Henderson property?" Melina's voice carried the same professional tone she used with difficult clients. "Derek Haynes Development is having some title issues." Derek Hayne. Graham filed the name away. "The chess tournament is next Friday," Tyler said, changing the subject. "Coach thinks I have a real shot at state qualifiers." "That's great, son." Graham's response was automatic, his mind analyzing the micro-expressions crossing his wife's face. She checked her phone twice during Tyler's explanation of his opening strategy. After dinner, Graham retreated to his office, while Melina claimed she needed to review contracts. Through the thin wall, he heard her making a call. "I can't talk long." "No, he doesn't suspect anything. Friday works, but make it earlier." Graham opened his laptop and began typing. His logistics software had made him wealthy by tracking packages across complex supply chains. Tracking one unfaithful wife would be elementary. The next morning, Melina left for work with a brightness Graham hadn't seen in months. She kissed his cheek, something that had become rare, and hummed while gathering her things. "I might be late tonight," she said. "Complex closing with the Riverside project." Graham nodded and watched her drive away in the Lexus. Then he opened his monitoring software and began his real work. By noon, he'd isolated the male voice from the car recordings. A quick search of Melina's contact list revealed Derek Hayne, listed as a professional contact, but the call logs showed conversations lasting 20 to 40 minutes. Real estate conversations didn't require that much time. Graham researched Derek's company, Hayne Development Corporation. Mid-sized operation, several residential projects around Charlotte. A quick dive into public records revealed a civil lawsuit from a subcontractor claiming unpaid wages. The company's financial filing showed some creative accounting that bordered on questionable. At 2:30 p.m., Graham's phone buzzed with a text from Melina. "Running behind, don't wait up." The GPS tracker in her phone showed she was at the Marriott in Winston-Salem, 60 miles from any property she should be handling. Graham drove there himself, parking where he could watch the hotel entrance. At 4:15, Melina emerged with a tall man in an expensive suit. They kissed in the parking lot before getting into separate cars. Derek Hayne matched his LinkedIn photo exactly. Graham followed Derek to a construction site, memorizing the license plate and noting the expensive watch and shoes. This wasn't some desperate affair born of loneliness. This was calculated, ongoing, and expensive. That evening, Melina returned home at 9:30 with takeout Chinese food and an elaborate story about document reviews running late. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question Graham had posed the night before. "Productive," Graham replied. "I'm thinking about taking a business trip next week." "Potential client in Atlanta wants to discuss a major implementation." "That sounds promising." Melina's relief was almost visible. "I could use some quiet time to catch up on my own work." Graham smiled. "I thought you might." Over the next 3 days, Graham prepared with the same methodical approach he'd used to build his software company. He researched Derek's background, financial situation, and business practices. He installed small cameras in strategic locations around their house. He opened a new bank account and transferred enough funds for an extended operation. Most importantly, he contacted a private investigator who specialized in corporate malfeasance. The investigator's preliminary report on Derek's company revealed several red flags: inflated invoices, missing receipts, and payments to shell companies that didn't seem to exist. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Graham's phone rang at 7 a.m. on Thursday. Unknown number. "Is this Graham Voss?" The woman's voice was controlled, but tense. "Yes. This is Renee Hain. I think we need to talk." They met at a coffee shop in Concord, halfway between their homes. Renee Hain was smaller than Graham had expected, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back severely. She sat across from him with a manila folder. "Your wife isn't Derek's first affair," she said without preamble. "She's the third one I know about in 2 years." Graham kept his expression neutral. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm done being humiliated, and because Derek's getting sloppy with money that isn't his." Renee opened the folder, revealing bank statements and email printouts. "He's been skimming from project accounts to pay for his extracurricular activities. Hotels, jewelry, expensive dinners. And you want what from me?" "Proof that will hold up in divorce court." "Evidence that Derek's stealing from his own company?" Renee's smile was thin and predatory. "I've been documenting everything for months, but I need someone with your technical skills to access his digital records." Graham studied the documents. Derek's personal spending had increased dramatically over the past year, with large cash withdrawals and payments to luxury retailers. "What makes you think I have technical skills?" "I researched you after I saw you following Derek yesterday. Vostrak Logistics, founded 12 years ago, estimated value $15 million. You didn't build that by being naive about data systems." Graham closed the folder. "What's your timeline?" "Derek's presenting to investors next Friday for a new development project. If certain information became public during that presentation, it would be devastating." "And my wife? From what I've gathered, she's been helping Derek move money through escrow accounts. Small amounts, but enough to lose her license if anyone investigated." Graham felt something cold settle in his chest. Melina wasn't just cheating. She was breaking laws that could send her to prison. "I need to think about this," he said. "Don't think too long. Derek's getting suspicious about your surveillance. He mentioned hiring security." Graham drove home in silence, processing the implications. His wife had not only betrayed their marriage, but also compromised her professional integrity for a man who treated affairs like business ventures. That evening, Melina announced another late meeting. "This Riverside project is more complex than expected," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Might need to work through the weekend." "Of course," Graham replied. "Tyler and I can handle things here." After Melina left, Graham sat with his son in the living room. Tyler was working through chess problems from a book, his concentration absolute. "Dad, is everything okay?" Tyler asked without looking up from the board. "You've been different lately." Graham considered lying, but Tyler deserved better. His son was 17, nearly an adult, with intelligence that missed very little. "Some problems at work," Graham said carefully. "Nothing you need to worry about." Tyler moved a piece and looked up. "Problems you can solve?" "Yes, just taking longer than usual." Tyler nodded and returned to his chess book. "Sometimes the best moves look wrong at first." Graham went to his office and called Renee Hain. "I'm in," he said when she answered. "But we do this carefully, legally, and completely." "Agreed. Can you meet tomorrow night?" "I have something to show you." The next evening, Graham told Melina he was meeting a potential client for dinner. She barely looked up from her laptop when he left. Renee's house was a modest ranch in a quiet neighborhood. She led Graham to a home office that rivaled his own in terms of organization and technology. "Derek thinks I'm a harmless housewife who doesn't understand business," she said, powering up 3 monitors. "He's been leaving his laptop open around me for months." The screens filled with financial documents, email records, and file directories from Derek's company. Renee had been systematically copying everything. "Here's what I found," she said, opening a spreadsheet. "Derek's been inflating material costs and pocketing the difference. He's also been billing clients for work that was never completed." Graham studied the numbers. This is embezzlement. Major felony territory. Gets better. Look at these email exchanges with your wife. The emails were professionally worded but clearly coordinated. Melina had been temporarily holding funds in escrow accounts longer than necessary, allowing Derek to use the float for personal expenses before the money moved to final destinations. She's committing wire fraud, Graham said quietly. Among other things. But here's the real prize. Renee opened another folder. Derek's been using company funds to buy cryptocurrency. $40,000 worth over the past 6 months. For what purpose? According to his browser history, he's planning to leave the country. There are flight searches to non-extradition countries and research on overseas property purchases. Graham felt the pieces clicking into place. He's going to bankrupt the company and disappear. Taking your wife with him, based on some of their more recent conversations. Renee played an audio file from Derek's phone. His voice was clear. Once the investor presentation is done and the money's transferred, we can be anywhere we want. Melina's handling the offshore account setup. Graham listened to his wife's voice responding, I've never done anything like this before. What if we get caught? We won't. By the time anyone figures it out, we'll be in a country that doesn't care about American business disputes. The recording ended. Graham stared at the computer screen, processing the full scope of the betrayal. Melina wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to steal money and flee the country. When is this investor presentation? Graham asked. Next Friday. Derek's expecting to raise $2 million for a new residential development. And you want to expose everything during the presentation? I want to destroy him completely. Career, reputation, freedom, everything. Renee's voice carried 22 years of accumulated anger. Derek thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Time to prove him wrong. Graham nodded slowly. I'll need access to his systems before Friday. Already arranged. Derek's meeting with a fake investor Monday afternoon. One of my friends works in commercial real estate. She set up the appointment. Derek will be out of the office for 3 hours. His security? Basic stuff. Derek's arrogant enough to believe his password schemes are unbreakable. They spent 2 more hours planning the operation. Graham would handle the technical infiltration while Renee managed the presentation ambush. By the time Graham left her house, they had a comprehensive strategy for destroying both Derek and Melina's lives. Graham drove home through empty suburban streets, his mind working through contingencies and variables. In chess, Tyler had taught him, the key to victory was thinking several moves ahead. Graham was now thinking 10 moves ahead. Melina was already asleep when he got home. She'd left a note saying her client meeting had gone well and she'd closed the Henderson property deal. Graham crumpled the note, knowing she'd spent the evening in a hotel room with Derek, planning their escape to some tropical paradise. Saturday morning brought an unexpected complication. Graham was reviewing Derek's company structure on his laptop when Tyler appeared in the office doorway. Dad, there's something weird going on. What do you mean? Tyler held up a tablet. Mom left her email open, and I was looking for that restaurant reservation confirmation for Grandma's birthday dinner. But look at this. The tablet displayed an email thread between Melina and someone named D discussing travel documents and bank transfers. The messages were coded but clearly referenced illegal activity. She's talking about fake identification and moving money to the Cayman Islands, Tyler said, his young face serious. This isn't about real estate, is it? Graham closed his laptop. Tyler deserved the truth. Your mother is having an affair, Graham said carefully. She's also helping her friend steal money from his company. Tyler sat down hard in the chair across from Graham's desk. For how long? At least 6 months for the affair. The financial crimes are more recent. And you know all this how? Graham explained the surveillance, the recordings, and his alliance with Renee Hain. Tyler listened without interruption, his expression growing colder with each revelation. She's planning to leave us, Tyler said when Graham finished. Leave the country. Yes. Tyler stared at the tablet screen. What are we going to do? We're going to stop them. Completely. Monday afternoon, Graham drove to Derek's office building while Renee confirmed the fake investor meeting had begun. The Hain Development Corporation occupied the 3rd floor of a glass office building in South Charlotte. Graham entered through the parking garage, using Renee's keycard to access the building. Derek's corner office was unlocked, his laptop still connected to the corporate network. Graham plugged in a USB device that would copy the entire hard drive while also installing monitoring software. The process would take 90 minutes, well within Derek's expected meeting duration. While the laptop copied, Graham photographed financial documents, email printouts, and a wall calendar that showed Derek's travel schedule. Several dates were marked M-Trip, obviously referencing meetings with Melina. Graham's phone buzzed with a text from Renee. "Meeting running long, you have extra time." Graham used the additional time to access Derek's email server and copy 2 years' worth of correspondence. The evidence of embezzlement was overwhelming. Derek had been stealing from his company almost since its inception. By 4 p.m., Graham was back in his car with a complete digital copy of Derek's business operations. Every bank account, every invoice, every incriminating email was now stored on encrypted drives. That evening, Melina announced she needed to work late again. "Big week ahead," she said, gathering her purse and laptop. "Several closings that require evening meetings?" Graham nodded sympathetically. "Don't work too hard." After Melina left, Graham and Tyler sat in the living room reviewing the copied files on Graham's laptop. "Look at this," Tyler said, pointing to an email from 3 days ago. "Mom's asking Derek about international wire transfer limits." "And here," Graham added, highlighting a different message. "Derek's telling her to quit her job after Friday's investor meeting." Tyler's jaw tightened. They really are planning to disappear. Not anymore, they aren't. Tuesday morning brought another surprise. Graham's phone rang at 6 a.m., Renee's number. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Someone broke into my house last night." "Derek?" "No. Derek was at a city planning meeting until 10 p.m. I confirmed it. This was someone else." Graham felt his pulse quicken. "What did they take?" "Nothing obvious, but someone went through my home office very carefully. Professional job." "Melina," Graham said, the pieces clicking together. "She must have suspected you were investigating Derek." "How would she know about me?" Graham thought quickly. "Derek probably mentioned his wife being suspicious. Melina's good at research. Part of her job. She could have identified you and decided to see what you knew." "So our cover is blown?" "Not necessarily. If they knew what we were planning, they wouldn't be proceeding with Friday's presentation. This was reconnaissance, not prevention." Renee was quiet for a moment. "What do we do?" "We accelerate the timeline." "Can you move the presentation ambush to Wednesday?" "I'll make some calls." Wednesday morning, Graham told Melina he needed to leave for his Atlanta business trip. "Client wants to meet earlier than expected," he explained while packing a suitcase. "Could be gone through the weekend." Melina's relief was obvious. "Drive safely. I'll hold down the fort here." Instead of driving to Atlanta, Graham checked into a hotel 15 minutes from Derek's office. He spent the day finalizing his digital assault, while Renee confirmed that Derek's investor presentation had been moved to Thursday afternoon. "Perfect," Graham said during their evening phone call. "And that gives us tomorrow morning to set up the final pieces. What about your wife? She thinks I'm in Atlanta. She'll be completely unprepared for what's coming." Thursday morning, Graham positioned himself in the hotel conference room where Derek would be presenting to potential investors. Renee had arranged for the presentation to be live-streamed to remote investors, giving Graham access to hijack the feed at the crucial moment. At 2 p.m., Derek entered the conference room wearing his most expensive suit and carrying a leather presentation folder. 5 potential investors sat around the polished table, representing pension funds and development corporations. "Gentlemen, thank you for your time," Derek began, connecting his laptop to the room's projection system. "I'm excited to show you the profit potential of our newest residential development." Derek's presentation covered 25 acres of prime real estate, projected construction costs, and expected returns. The investors asked intelligent questions about permits, environmental impact, and market demand. Graham waited until Derek reached the financial projection slide. "As you can see," Derek was saying, "our track record shows consistent profitability across all previous projects." Graham triggered the override sequence he'd installed in Derek's laptop. The screen flickered, then displayed a new slide titled Actual Financial Records. "What the hell?" Derek spun toward his laptop, frantically pressing keys. The hijacked presentation now showed Derek's bank statements, highlighting the embezzled funds, inflated invoices, and missing project money. Audio began playing. Derek's voice from recorded phone calls discussing how to hide stolen money from auditors. "Turn it off," Derek shouted, but the laptop wouldn't respond to his commands. The presentation continued with email exchanges between Derek and Melina, clearly showing her role in the money laundering scheme. Screenshots of cryptocurrency purchases, travel bookings to non-extradition countries, and research on offshore banking filled the screen. One investor stood up. "Mr. Hain, are these documents authentic?" Derek lunged for the projection system's power cord, but the damage was done. The investors had seen everything, and several were already making phone calls. "This is a mistake," Derek said desperately. "Someone hacked my system. This isn't real." The final slide displayed a summary of Derek's crimes with supporting documentation references. Graham had included everything: embezzlement totals, wire fraud details, and conspiracy charges. Within 10 minutes, the conference room was empty except for Derek, who sat staring at the frozen presentation screen. Graham's phone buzzed with a text from Renee. "It's done. Derek's finished." But Graham wasn't done yet. Thursday evening, while Derek was presumably dealing with the aftermath of his destroyed presentation, Graham drove to Melina's office. The escrow company occupied a small building in a professional complex, and Melina often worked late on complex closings. Graham entered through the building's main entrance and walked to Melina's office. The door was open, and she was at her desk reviewing documents. "Graham," Melina looked up in surprise. "I thought you were in Atlanta." "Meeting ended early," Graham said, closing the office door behind him. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made Melina straighten in her chair. "About what?" Graham placed a tablet on her desk and pressed play. Derek's voice filled the room. "Once the investor presentation is done and the money's transferred, we can be anywhere we want." Melina's face went pale as she heard her own voice responding about offshore accounts and leaving the country. "How did you get this recording? Professional surveillance equipment in our car, same system that captured you and Derek planning to steal $2 million and flee to the Cayman Islands?" Melina stood up slowly. "Graham, I can explain." "Explain what? The affair? The embezzlement? The fake travel documents? The plan to abandon our son and disappear with stolen money? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." Graham's voice remained calm, controlled. "You've been committing felonies, Melina. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit theft." Derek's presentation today showed everything to potential investors. "What presentation?" Graham explained the morning's events, watching Melina's expression shift from denial to fear to desperation. "This will destroy both of us," she said finally. "No, this will destroy you and Derek. I'm just the messenger." Melina sat back down, her professional composure cracking. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you. Everything's already in motion." Graham picked up the tablet. "Derek's company is finished. The investors who saw today's presentation are filing complaints with the SEC and local prosecutors. Your escrow violations will be reported to the state licensing board tomorrow morning." "Graham, please." 22 years of marriage, Melina. 22 years. And you threw it away for a criminal who was planning to abandon you anyway. What do you mean? Graham showed her additional emails from Derek's laptop, messages to other women, travel bookings for one person, and financial transfers that excluded Melina entirely. Derek never intended to take you with him. You were useful for moving money, but the escape plan was always solo. Melina stared at the screen, processing the full scope of her betrayal and Derek's deception. "I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow," Graham continued. "Tyler knows everything. He chose his side." Graham left Melina sitting in her office, surrounded by the remnants of her professional life and criminal conspiracy. Friday morning brought the consequences Derek and Melina had never anticipated. Graham's phone rang at 7 a.m., a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Voss, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. We need to discuss some financial documents that were forwarded to our white-collar crime unit." "Of course, Detective. When would be convenient?" "This morning, if possible. We're executing search warrants at 2 locations, and your cooperation would be valuable." By 9 a.m., Graham was sitting in a police conference room, explaining how he'd discovered his wife's involvement in Derek's embezzlement scheme. He provided the detective with copies of all relevant evidence, clearly identifying his role as an innocent spouse who'd uncovered the crimes. "Your wife's escrow activities appear to violate several federal statutes," Detective Martinez said, reviewing the documents. "Wire fraud, money laundering, possibly conspiracy charges. I understand. I'm prepared to testify if necessary. And the surveillance methods you used? Legal. My own vehicle, my own property, publicly available information." Graham's research had been thorough. "Everything I collected would be admissible in court." Meanwhile, search warrants were being executed at Derek's office and Melina's workplace. Both locations yielded additional evidence of the financial crimes Graham had documented. Derek was arrested at his home Friday afternoon. The local news covered the story. Local developer charged with embezzlement fraud. Melina was arrested at her office 2 hours later. Her escrow license was immediately suspended pending investigation. Graham watched the news coverage from his hotel room, feeling a cold satisfaction as the reporters described the scope of the financial crimes. Derek and Melina had stolen over $300,000 from various sources, with plans to steal millions more. But Graham's revenge wasn't complete yet. Saturday morning, Graham returned home to find Tyler waiting in the living room with a chess set. "Want to play?" Tyler asked. They set up the board in comfortable silence. Tyler had inherited Graham's methodical approach to problem solving, but he'd also developed his own strategic instincts. "Mom called," Tyler said, moving his opening pawn. "From jail." "What did she want?" "To explain." "To apologize." Tyler captured one of Graham's pieces. "I didn't take the call." Graham studied the board. "You don't have to choose sides, Tyler. She's still your mother. She chose when she decided to steal money and leave the country." Tyler's voice carried a hardness that reminded Graham of himself. Some choices can't be undone. They played 3 games. Tyler won 2 of them. Sunday brought unexpected visitors. Graham was reviewing divorce paperwork when the doorbell rang. Through the window, he saw a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. "Are you Graham Voss?" she asked when he opened the door. "Yes." "I'm Patricia Hain, Derek's sister." She held up a manila folder. "I think you should see this." Graham invited her into the living room. Patricia opened the folder, revealing financial documents and photographs. "Derek's been stealing from our family for years," she said. "Our father left us a construction business when he died. Derek was supposed to manage it with me, but he's been siphoning money from our accounts to fund his lifestyle." The documents showed a pattern of theft extending back 5 years. Derek had used his sister's business as a personal bank account, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars without authorization. "Why are you showing me this?" Graham asked. "Because Derek's going to blame everyone except himself. He'll say your wife manipulated him, that he was the victim." Patricia's expression was grim. "I want people to know Derek's been a thief long before he met Melina." Graham accepted the documents. "I'll make sure the prosecutors see these. There's more. Derek owes money to some very unforgiving people, contractors, suppliers, private lenders." Patricia stood to leave. "He's not just facing prison time, he's facing people who don't settle disputes in courtrooms." After Patricia left, Graham called Detective Martinez and arranged to provide the additional evidence of Derek's crimes. The pattern of theft was even more extensive than Graham had realized. Monday morning brought the confrontation Graham had been anticipating. He was leaving the courthouse after filing divorce papers when Derek appeared in the parking lot. The man looked haggard, unshaven, wearing clothes that had clearly been slept in. "You son of a witch," Derek snarled, approaching Graham's car. "You destroyed everything." Graham didn't respond, simply continued loading documents into his vehicle. "I know you set me up," Derek continued. "That fake investor meeting, the computer hack, that was all you—" "I didn't hack anything," Graham said calmly. "I just made sure the right people saw information that was already on your computer." Derek stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You ruined my life." "You ruined your own life." "I just documented it. Melina told me you've been stalking us for months. That's illegal surveillance, harassment. Recording conversations in my own vehicle isn't illegal. Following someone on public roads isn't illegal. Copying files from a computer I had legal access to isn't illegal." Graham's voice remained level. "But embezzling $300,000 is very illegal." Derek swung at Graham, a wild haymaker that telegraphed its intent. Graham had been expecting this moment, had prepared for it during hours of research on self-defense techniques. Graham ducked the punch and drove his shoulder into Derek's midsection, using the man's momentum to slam him against the car. Derek's expensive watch scraped against the metal as Graham twisted his arm behind his back. "Listen carefully," Graham said, his voice quiet but intense. "You're going to prison. Melina's going to prison. Your company is bankrupt. Your reputation is destroyed, and everyone you've stolen from is going to sue you into poverty. Derek struggled against Graham's grip. Let me go. But here's what you're really not understanding, Graham continued. This isn't about the money you stole or even the affair. This is about you thinking you were smarter than everyone else. Graham released Derek, who stumbled away, rubbing his arm. You thought my wife was just another conquest, and I was just another clueless husband. You thought your investors were stupid and your crimes were clever. Graham straightened his jacket. You were wrong about everything. Derek backed toward his car, his bravado finally cracking. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet. Graham drove away, leaving Derek standing alone in the courthouse parking lot. That evening, Tyler was waiting in the kitchen when Graham returned home. The news said Derek's company filed for bankruptcy, Tyler said, looking up from his homework. Inevitable result of stealing operating capital. And, Mom? Grand jury indictment next week. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy charges. Graham sat across from his son. She's going to prison, Tyler. Tyler nodded slowly. How long? Federal sentencing guidelines suggest 3 to 5 years, assuming she cooperates with prosecutors. And then what? Graham considered the question. Then she starts over with nothing. No license, no career, no money. Felony record makes employment difficult. Do you feel bad for her? Graham thought about 22 years of marriage, the woman he trusted completely, the mother of his son. I feel bad for who I thought she was. But that person never existed. 2 weeks later, Graham received a call from Renee Hain. Derek pled guilty to all charges, she said. 7 years federal prison, full restitution, lifetime ban from securities trading. And Melina? Still negotiating with prosecutors. Her lawyers trying to reduce charges in exchange for testimony against Derek. Graham wasn't surprised. Melina had always been practical above all else. Are you satisfied with the outcome? Renee asked. Graham considered the question. Derek's life was destroyed, career finished, reputation ruined, facing years in prison. Melina had lost everything she'd worked for and would spend her middle age as a convicted felon. Justice isn't always satisfying, Graham said finally, but it's necessary. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once Melina pled guilty to federal charges. Graham retained custody of Tyler and most of their assets, as Melina's criminal actions had voided any claim to marital property. 6 months after discovering the affair, Graham stood in his home office reviewing the final legal documents. The house felt different now, quieter, but also cleaner somehow. Tyler appeared in the doorway, holding his chess set. Want to play? He asked. Always. They set up the board in the living room, the same place they'd played hundreds of games over the years. But this time felt different. They were no longer father and son. They were partners who'd survived a betrayal together. I've been thinking about college applications, Tyler said, moving his opening piece. Any preferences? Somewhere far from here. Fresh start. Tyler captured one of Graham's pawns. You could come too. Sell the company, start something new. Graham studied the board. The idea had merit. Vostrack Logistics was successful, but it was also tied to memories of building a life with Melina. Starting over might be exactly what both of them needed. We'll see, Graham said, making his move. One decision at a time. They played in comfortable silence as the sun set outside their windows. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. 3 months later, Graham received an unexpected visitor. He was working in his office when the doorbell rang. Through the security camera, he saw a middle-aged woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Mr. Voss? I'm Jennifer Kane with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Graham invited her in, wondering what new complications might be emerging from Derek and Melina's crimes. We've been investigating a broader network of financial fraud, Agent Kane explained, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. Your ex-wife and Derek Hain were part of a larger operation. The briefcase contained photographs and documents showing connections between Derek's embezzlement and a multi-state money laundering ring. Melina's escrow manipulations had facilitated crimes beyond what Graham had discovered. How extensive? Graham asked. Over $2 million in documented fraud across 4 states. Derek was a middle-level operator, not the architect. Agent Kane showed Graham surveillance photos of people he didn't recognize. But his cooperation with our investigation has been limited. And you want what from me? Your technical expertise. The digital evidence you collected on Derek was more comprehensive than our own investigation. We need help understanding the full scope of the network. Graham agreed to consult with the FBI, providing technical analysis of the digital evidence he'd collected. The investigation revealed that Derek's crimes were part of a sophisticated operation targeting small investors in development projects across the Southeast. The broader investigation lasted 8 more months, resulting in 17 additional arrests and the recovery of over $5 million in stolen funds. Graham's methodical documentation proved crucial in connecting the various crimes and identifying the operation's leadership. But the investigation also revealed something Graham hadn't expected. Melina had been recruited into the network specifically because of her access to escrow accounts and her relationship with Graham's successful business. "They targeted your wife because they wanted access to your company's financial systems," Agent Kane explained during one of their meetings. "Derek's seduction was a deliberate strategy to get close to your business." Graham absorbed this information with his characteristic calm, but internally he felt a cold rage building. The affair hadn't been a crime of passion. It had been a calculated assault on everything he'd built. "Did Melina know?" Graham asked. "We believe she was recruited gradually, started with small favors, escalated to major crimes." Classic manipulation pattern. Graham wasn't sure if this revelation made Melina's betrayal better or worse. She'd been manipulated, but she'd also made conscious choices to break laws and betray her family. The final phase of Graham's revenge came 18 months after he'd first heard Derek's voice through his car speakers. Melina was released on supervised probation pending her sentencing hearing. Her cooperation with the FBI had reduced her potential prison time, but she still faced 2 years in federal prison and lifetime exclusion from any financial services profession. Graham was working in his office when Tyler announced that Melina was at the front door. "Do you want to see her?" Tyler asked. Graham saved his work and walked to the foyer. Through the glass panels beside the door, he could see Melina standing on their front porch. She looked older, thinner, wearing clothes that had clearly come from a discount store. Graham opened the door, but didn't invite her inside. "Hello, Graham," Melina said quietly. "Melina, I was hoping we could talk about Tyler, about the future. Tyler's 18 now. He makes his own decisions about relationships." Melina's eyes filled with tears. "I know I destroyed everything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I'm still his mother." Graham studied the woman who had shared his life for over 2 decades. The affair, the crimes, the attempted abandonment, all of it had revealed someone he'd never really known. "Tyler's at college," Graham said. "Early admission to MIT, full scholarship, computer science and business." Pride and pain crossed Melina's face simultaneously. "That's wonderful. He always was brilliant." "He is. And he's learned some valuable lessons about trust and consequences." "Graham, I need you to know. Derek manipulated me. The FBI explained how they recruited people like me. I never meant for things to go so far. But they did go that far." "You made choices, Melina. Adult choices with adult consequences." Melina wiped her eyes. "Is there any chance, after I serve my time, that we could rebuild something? Not marriage, but maybe friendship. For Tyler's sake?" Graham considered the question. The woman standing before him had committed crimes that could have destroyed his business and sent his son's college fund to offshore accounts. She'd planned to abandon Tyler for a life of luxury with a convicted felon. "I don't think so," Graham said finally. "Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned." Melina nodded slowly. "I understand. Can you tell Tyler that I love him? That I'm proud of him? You can tell him yourself. He has your contact information." Graham closed the door, ending the last conversation he would ever have with his ex-wife. Through the window, he watched Melina walk to a rusted compact car and drive away. 6 months later, Tyler called from MIT with news about his semester project. "Dad, you're going to love this. I'm developing an AI system that can detect financial fraud patterns in real time, catches embezzlement schemes before they mature." Graham smiled, recognizing his son's methodical intelligence combined with hard-earned wisdom about human nature. "Any particular inspiration for the project?" Graham asked. "Let's just say I have some personal experience with financial criminals," Tyler replied. "Professor thinks it could be commercially viable. Want a business partner?" "I was hoping you'd ask." 2 years after Melina was released from federal prison, Graham received a final piece of information about Derek Hayne. Agent Kane called with an update on the broader financial fraud investigation. "Derek was killed in prison last week," she said without preamble. stabbed by another inmate during a dispute over gambling debts. Graham felt no satisfaction at the news, only a sense of closure. Derek's story had ended the way many criminal stories end, with violence and waste. What about the rest of the network? Graham asked. Dismantled completely. 17 convictions, full asset forfeiture, victims fund established for restitution. Your technical work was instrumental in that success. Graham thanked Agent Kane and ended the call. Derek Hayne was dead. Melina was living in an efficiency apartment working as a restaurant hostess, and the criminal network that had targeted his family was destroyed. Justice, Graham reflected, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was simply thorough. 5 years later, Graham stood in the conference room of Voss Haynes Security Solutions, the cybersecurity company he'd founded with Tyler after selling Voss Track Logistics. The irony of the company name wasn't lost on either of them. Renee Hayne had become their first major investor after her divorce settlement provided substantial capital for startup ventures. The fraud detection system is ready for beta testing, Tyler announced to the assembled team of programmers and security specialists. 3 major banks have agreed to pilot the software. Graham watched his son present the technical specifications with quiet pride. Tyler had inherited his analytical mind, but had developed his own leadership style, more collaborative than Graham's solitary approach. After the meeting, Graham and Tyler walked to their adjoining offices. Any regrets? Tyler asked, settling behind his desk covered with computer monitors and programming manuals. Graham considered the question. 5 years ago, he'd been a successful software entrepreneur with a comfortable marriage and a promising future. Today, he was an even more successful entrepreneur with a brilliant business partner and hard-earned wisdom about trust and betrayal. No regrets, Graham said. Some lessons are expensive, but they're worth learning. Tyler nodded and returned to his programming. Graham watched his son work, recognizing the same methodical patience that had served them both well during their darkest period. The phone on Graham's desk buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. Graham Voss. Mr. Voss, this is Detective Rodriguez with the Charlotte Police Department. I'm calling about an incident involving your ex-wife. Graham felt his stomach tighten. What kind of incident? Melina Voss was found dead in her apartment this morning. Apparent suicide. She left a note mentioning you and your son. Graham sat down slowly, processing the information. Melina had been struggling since her release from prison, unable to find stable employment, isolated from former friends, living in poverty. What did the note say? Graham asked. I'd prefer to discuss that in person, if possible. Can you come to the station? An hour later, Graham sat in a police conference room, reading Melina's final letter. Her handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. Graham and Tyler, I know I destroyed our family and betrayed your trust. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that losing both of you was the worst consequence of my choices. Not the prison time, not the career destruction, not the poverty. Losing my family was the price I couldn't bear to pay. Tyler, you were the best part of my life, and I'm proud of the man you've become. Graham, you were a better husband than I deserved, and I'm sorry I threw away 22 years of love for something worthless. I hope you can both find peace. Graham folded the letter and handed it back to Detective Rodriguez. Are there any arrangements we need to make? Graham asked. She requested cremation, no service. But she did leave instructions for her ashes to be scattered at the lake where you used to take family vacations. Graham remembered those trips. Tyler learning to fish, Melina reading novels under an umbrella, all of them playing board games in their rented cabin. Before the betrayal, before the crimes, before everything fell apart. That evening, Graham called Tyler at MIT to inform him of his mother's death. How do you feel about it? Tyler asked after a long silence. Sad, Graham said honestly. Not for who she became, but for who she used to be, or who I thought she was. Do you want to scatter her ashes at the lake? Graham considered the request. Going to that lake would mean confronting memories of better times, of a family that had existed before greed and betrayal destroyed it. Yes, Graham said finally. She was your mother. She deserves that much. 2 weeks later, Graham and Tyler drove to Lake Norman with a simple urn containing Melina's ashes. They rented a small boat and motored to the center of the lake where they'd spent so many summer afternoons years earlier. Tyler scattered the ashes without ceremony. letting them drift across the water's surface. "Do you think she really regretted everything?" Tyler asked as they watched the ashes disappear. "I think she regretted the consequences," Graham replied. "Whether she truly understood the harm she caused is something we'll never know." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the sun set over the water. "Are we done with this now?" Tyler asked. Graham started the boat's engine and turned toward shore. "Yes, we're done." The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Graham felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Not forgiveness exactly, but a sense of completion. Melina's story was finished. Derek's story was finished. The criminals who had targeted his family were imprisoned or dead. Only the future remained, and that belonged to him and Tyler. 6 months later, Graham received an invitation that surprised him. Renee Hain was remarrying, a retired FBI agent she'd met during the financial fraud investigation. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. "I wanted to thank you," Renee said during the reception, approaching Graham at the bar. "Not just for helping destroy Derek, but for showing me that revenge doesn't have to consume you." "What do you mean?" "You could have become obsessed with hatred, let it poison your relationship with Tyler, spent years focused on punishing Derek and—" "Melina," Renee sipped her champagne. "Instead, you handled it like a business problem, methodically, completely, then moved on to building something better." Graham nodded. "Hate is expensive. I had better things to do with my energy." "Derek never understood that. Even in prison, he was still plotting revenge against you, still believing he was the victim." Renee's smile was grim. "He died angry and alone because he couldn't let go of his grievances." Graham raised his glass. To moving forward. To moving forward. As Graham drove home from the wedding, he reflected on the past 5 years. He discovered his wife's betrayal, exposed a criminal conspiracy, destroyed 2 lives, built a new business, and watched his son become a successful young man. The methodical approach that had served him well in business had also served him well in revenge. No dramatic confrontations, no illegal actions, no violations of his own moral code. Just careful documentation, strategic timing, and patient execution. Tyler was waiting when Graham arrived home, sitting in the living room with his chess set. "Want to play?" Tyler asked. "Always." They set up the board as they had hundreds of times before, but now they were equals, business partners, co-founders, survivors of a betrayal that had made them both stronger. "I've been thinking about expanding the company," Tyler said, moving his opening piece. "International markets, government contracts, maybe even some consulting work." "Ambitious," Graham replied, studying the board. "Think we're ready for that level of growth?" "I think we're ready for anything." Graham made his move and settled back to study his son's strategy. Tyler had learned well, not just chess, but patience, planning, and the value of thinking several moves ahead. Outside their windows, Charlotte's skyline glittered in the darkness. Somewhere in that city, other people were probably discovering betrayals, facing crises, making choices that would define their futures. Graham hoped they would choose as wisely as he had. The game continued in comfortable silence. 2 survivors building their next chapter one careful move at a time. 3 years later, Graham stood before a federal courthouse where the final member of Derek's criminal network was being sentenced. The investigation that had started with his discovery of Melina's affair had ultimately resulted in 23 convictions and the recovery of over $8 million in stolen funds. Agent Kane approached Graham as they left the courthouse. "This concludes our investigation," she said, shaking his hand. "Your technical expertise and evidence collection made this case possible." "Justice was served," Graham replied simply. "More than that. Your approach prevented dozens of other victims from being defrauded. The early detection system you and Tyler developed is now being used by banks nationwide." Graham nodded. The fraud detection software had evolved from Tyler's college project into a sophisticated system that had already prevented millions in losses for financial institutions. "One more thing," Agent Kane said, handing Graham a manila envelope. "We found this in Derek's personal effects after he died. Thought you should see it." Graham opened the envelope to find a photograph of himself leaving the courthouse after his divorce proceedings. On the back, Derek had written, "Game isn't over yet." Graham studied the photo for a moment, then handed it back to Agent Kane. "Actually, it is over," Graham said. Derek just never realized it. That evening, Graham and Tyler celebrated their company's 5th anniversary at a restaurant overlooking Lake Norman. Their fraud detection software was now used by over 200 financial institutions, and they employed 37 people. To successful revenge, Tyler said, raising his glass. To successful business, Graham corrected. The revenge was just the foundation. Tyler laughed. Fair point. To building something better from the ashes of something broken. They clinked glasses and watched the sun set over the lake where they'd scattered Melina's ashes 3 years earlier. Any regrets? Tyler asked, echoing a question he'd posed many times over the years. Graham considered everything that had happened since that first recorded conversation in his car. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also led to discoveries about his own strength, his son's character, and his ability to rebuild after destruction. No regrets, Graham said finally. Some storms clear the ground for better construction. As they drove home, Graham reflected on the completeness of his victory. Derek was dead. Melina was dead. The criminal network was destroyed. His business was thriving. Tyler was successful and strong, but more importantly, Graham had learned that the best revenge wasn't dramatic or violent. It was simply living well while your enemies destroyed themselves. The methodical patience that had built his software company had also dismantled his enemies' lives. Not through hatred or obsession, but through careful planning, strategic thinking, and the understanding that justice was more satisfying than vengeance. Tyler was right. They were ready for anything now. They'd survived the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, smarter, and more successful than before. Graham parked in their driveway and looked at the house he'd once shared with Melina. It felt different now, not haunted by memories, but cleaned by time and truth. This was home again, not just a place where betrayal had lived. Chess game? Tyler asked as they entered the house. Actually, I think I'll pass tonight, Graham said. I have some planning to do. New business ideas? Something like that. Graham went to his office and opened his laptop. On the screen was an email from a venture capital firm interested in acquiring their fraud detection technology for a substantial sum. Graham smiled and began typing his response. The future was full of possibilities, and he intended to approach each one with the same methodical precision that had served him so well. The quiet founder had become the successful survivor, and that was the best revenge of all.